Because one thing this virus really exposed is that this country as a whole was both figuratively and literally living paycheck to paycheck. And so we quickly got to a point where politicians were looking at entire industries as acceptable losses, on top of our supply chain immediately collapsing. And while I'm absolutely not just talking about hospitals and healthcare employees, one of the strangest aspects of this pandemic was how we both prop them up while not actually helping them. Because while we'll certainly applaud them as they go to work and give them free fast food, we're also not going to pay them more. And in fact, in some cases, if a healthcare professional tries to leave their current job for better working conditions, apparently it's totally cool for that hospital to issue a fucking restraining order forcing those people to not be able to get a new job. That's a real thing that happened in Wisconsin that has since thankfully been lifted in the courts. But apparently that's the lesson some of these hospitals learned, that it's easier to legally harass employees than treat them marginally better. Holy shit, holy fucking shit. How are we not seeing stories like this as America hitting rock bottom? Or have we already figured out a way to spin it as an inspirational story?
Steve Hartman has the inspiring story of some young people to the rescue.
When people call for an ambulance in Sackett's Harbor, New York, and the crew shows up at their front door, almost everyone has the same reaction.
A lot of people just come up and ask you, like, wait, how old are you?
You're the EMT?
Or like, when's the ambulance coming?
So what do you say?
We just explain to them, we are the ambulance.
These baby-faced first responders took over the village's emergency medical services not long after COVID hit, when all the older EMS volunteers either couldn't or wouldn't do the job anymore.
Ha 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 ha! So cute. Look at those baby-faced ambulance drivers we're training to save lives because we've run out of medical professionals due to massive sickness. That's definitely a heartwarming story instead of a clear sign that society is falling apart. But I guess child labor is just how we've decided to fix the situation instead of considering perhaps, maybe, rethinking a system that is clearly broken. Like, never mind considering things like making med school cheaper or perhaps free or raising workers' pay. No, we're just gonna revert labor rights back to the early 1900s. Real retro, you know? Bringing back the 20s and such. And as it stands, we're experiencing a massive shortage in healthcare workers as 1 in 5 workers have quit their job because of stuff like burnout and, according to one survey, a lack of supplies at the hospital. That's right, as of late 2021, there's still a massive supply chain issue at hospitals and retailers. Or to quote one business owner, the whole system is totally fucked. And so it turns out that we built that entire structure on a hilariously flimsy foundation, meaning that the entire way we deal with trade has to be rethought, and even our commerce secretary is saying that it's going to take time to get back to normal. Depending on who you ask, this is either a tiny hiccup or simply what life will be from now on. But circling back to healthcare employees and essential workers getting that free fast food, here's a little riddle for you. Who exactly was cooking and giving them those meals? Robots. Some kind of bird race we created in a lab. That's dumb. Why would we let birds handle food? Perhaps it was also people. And so it's odd that the people who were forced to clock into these minimum wage service jobs weren't also applauded every day. And in fact, jobs like line cooks, security guards, and taxi drivers had some of the highest rates of COVID deaths during this pandemic. And so, geez, along with healthcare workers, perhaps we should be paying these people a lot more since they're so vital to our economy that we're risking their lives. Perhaps it's extremely up that childcare workers, for example, are making an average of $12 an hour despite being ridiculously important in keeping people out of poverty. And so, no wonder that we're seeing so many worker strikes suddenly happening in this country. Or as the New York Times put it, a mysterious and unexplained disease of commoner worksfolk demanding to not be treated like wet trash. Oh, what are we to do with this infectious new pridefulness of the worthless lesser classes? This is actually one of the more positive lessons that some of us did, for the most part, succeed in learning from this pandemic. It's something that we're absolutely planning to do an episode about in the future. Specifically, these strikes and the progress that is or isn't being made. For example, in October, 10,000 picketing workers from John Deere successfully negotiated 5 to 6% raises. On the other side, HelloFresh workers failed to unionize after the company launched a campaign against it, despite the many claims of unsafe working conditions for their employees. Yes, that's HelloFresh.com, America's favorite way to have farm fresh food delivered straight to your door by an extremely miserable employee. But overall, that is at least one positive mindset we're getting from this pandemic. The realization that the systems we had in place, when threatened just a little bit, were almost immediately willing to risk the American people instead of change. Like, if COVID was a bear, and the government and large businesses were our spouse who chose to shove us between them and the bear, we would then have to seriously sit down and rethink that relationship. And so people are realizing more and more that things like raising the minimum wage and having universal health care should and can be demanded. Because if we actually band together, it turns out we have way more power than them, if we band together. Because the other thing we've learned from this should be evident in the fact that COVID is not even close to being over yet, despite some very loud people proclaiming otherwise.
It's just gone on too long. Nobody cares anymore. Last night, the Grubhub delivery guy was eating my French fries right in front of me. I mean, too long. I don't want to live in your paranoid world anymore, your masked paranoid world. You know, you go out, it's silly now. You know, you have to have your mask, you have to have a card, you have to have a booster, they scan your head. Like you're a cashier and I'm a bunch of bananas. I'm not bananas, you are.
So let me start by saying, I understand the reason so many people are done with COVID. Emotionally speaking, I too am done with COVID. I don't know if you realize this, but literally no one wants COVID to keep happening. This pandemic, as we mentioned earlier, was profoundly difficult on mental health. But I don't think we took enough time to really reflect on that, to reflect on the actual geography of our world changing, on businesses we enjoyed vanishing, on going to see movies or eating at restaurants becoming non-existent or at best extremely stressful, on seeing our loved ones die, and for many, on feeling this toxic resentment toward individuals who simply refuse to accept the reality of what needs to be done from day one. Hey, Bill Maher, you're over COVID now? How is that different from when you were over COVID back in March of 2020? Hey, Bill Maher, I know I've said this on the show at least one other time, but could you perhaps consider for a moment, just a tiny bit, addressing my humble request for you to 100% absolutely shut the fuck up? There's this absolutely unreal and artificial pushback we're seeing against claims of medical fascism and draconian practices, people acting like it's brave to declare that they are done with COVID, as if they live in an Orwellian world of street marching mask squads blackbagging anyone without a vaccine. But like, most large companies have already dropped mask requirements. Biden's minimal vaccine and testing mandates have been struck down by the courts. Businesses and schools are all open again. So I don't know, man. What the fuck are these people even talking about? They won, in that we have decided to just let COVID take us all. The dipshit anti-vaccine babies all got their bottle and then some. And since when did any of these dips spend so much as even a fucking day not whining about the extremely brief lockdown? The idea that we should be done with the pandemic simply because people are tired of it, coming from those who never made an effort to actually try and reduce the spread of the virus from day one, is something we need to reject wholeheartedly. Because I get it. I get why this type of message appeals to people who are just so fucking tired of the isolation and fear. But the only way to actually get out of this is to be patient, do the work, and I guess continue to hound the government for some semblance of help. Because holy sexy cow, the government gets a big ol' F on this one. And when you consider that everything we've talked about today can and will be applied to future climate-related disasters, you know, the denial of science, lack of foresight and planning, refusal to spend the necessary resources or sacrifice the comfort of the upper classes, profound negligence towards minimum wage workers and the elderly in exchange for holding on to a dying economy, the lack of willingness to protect the most vulnerable, the disinterest in redesigning our system to actually function, and this lack of people agreeing on a common reality and working towards a common goal. It's just not looking great for when the shit really starts to hit the fan. So sadly, the lesson is that we just can't rely on the systems in place anytime soon. We can definitely push for change, expect the best, but practice for the worst. And we can do that right now during this pandemic, which eventually will, in some form, actually end. But for now, if you're in a position where you have the means to help others who don't, a landlord or an employer who can make lives a little easier, you just gotta do that. You gotta support each other as best you can and think about how this can be avoided in the future. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.